This is integration of disparate systems, and what the topic is really about, it's about the benefits and drawbacks of product vendors who make a single technology, and you take several single technologies, integrate them together to create a total solution, versus an organization, a vendor that creates all the different technology categories, right? You get the cameras, and the access control, and the video management, and the MVR all from a single company, or do you piece and part best-of-breed products together for that type of a solution? And with me today is a panel who will speak on this, panel of expert consultants, including John Bekisz, who is with Sentinel Consulting, and then we have Jim Francis with LFJ Consulting Services, and Jeff Pronschinske, who is with Mead and Hunt. So what we'll do is give you a little bit of background to begin the presentation. Then we'll go into various categories or topic areas to compare both what I call best-of-breed solutions versus single vendor solutions where you get everything from one organization. And then we'll ask our panel members their thoughts, opinions, experiences in those different areas. If anybody in the audience has any questions or wants to interject, please feel free to do so through the course of the presentation. Okay, so first and foremost, what is single source and best-of-breed vendors? So I took a shot at definition. Basically, a single source vendor, the idea is one company makes a variety of different security technologies that all tie together. Because all the technologies are developed under one roof, the integration between the different pieces and parts should be seamless, right? So you get the access control and intrusion detection and video surveillance and cameras all from the same company, all the different feature sets tie together perfectly well, and you have a single point of support. Those are kind of the general concepts behind the single source vendor. And some examples of organizations that might fall into that category, both I guess you could say old and new, would be up here on the slide. And there's many others beyond this. And then if we're talking about a best-of-breed vendor, this is an organization that develops one particular type of technology. It could be a camera manufacturer. All they do is manufacture cameras because that's their bread and butter, that's their sole focus. They're going to put all of their efforts and resources into making the very best cameras possible, and that's kind of where that concept of best-of-breed comes from. You may see more innovation with these types of companies. This is all very opinion-based and kind of high level. But some examples of these types of organizations are on the slide here. My company included on that list as well. And the idea with these is to create a total security solution as you take the very best, your favorite VMS, and you pair it up with your favorite piece of hardware. And the best cameras for the particular job might include cameras from several different camera vendors. Some of the best for outdoor, some of the best for the specific type of setting. Maybe you want some 360s, you want a particular specialized 360. You take all these different technologies and you pair them together through the integrations that these individual organizations have made with their technology partner companies. All right, so before we get rolling into it, everybody has a good idea of what single source and best of breed is. For those involved in specifying security projects in the room, if you could, take out your smartphones, and we're going to go to a website. If you participated in the poll yesterday, we're going to use the same polling technology. It's called Participol. So open up your web browser and go to brc.participol.com. You'll see it up there in the corner of the slide. If you want to use the QR code, you can do that. We'll take you right there. And then if you could, you'll be presented with a screen that has options A through F. We just have two options for this question. The question is, do you currently specify a majority of systems using single vendor solution or a best of breed solution? We'll let the fancy progress bar go, and we'll collect our votes. So far we got 5. Everybody who votes gets a $100 gift card. That's not true at all. But I got 2 more votes. Okay, let's see how we did. Okay, so it looks like 75% are specifying best-of-breed solutions and 25% single vendor solutions. So that is interesting.
Can I qualify my vote?
Yes, please.
I really wanted to vote for all of the above.
Well, you don't get that choice this time. But actually, I thought of that too.
There's a reason, because there's, depending on the application and the level of integration needed, is really where, one approach or the other, makes sense.
That's a really excellent point. Yeah, I think a lot of people would agree. During the roundtable discussions that we had with consultants yesterday, I had some people, tell us, I like your, so we're in the best of breed category, if you will. And they would tell us, I love your the concept of your solutions and the features you have. However, I want to put this together with an access control product, and what happens 3 releases from now, does the integration break? How do you guys keep? So I think depending upon the project needs, people will go with whatever is best for the circumstance. So yeah, you're absolutely right. All right, well, let's keep going here. So kind of the history of the market direction is, back in the day, you had vast majority of popular solutions were what we would classify as single vendor solutions. And then we hit, with the advent of IP cameras and the popular IP cameras and VMS products, it really shifted towards this best of breed solution. These solutions were considered, proprietary, an evil word at the time. So nobody wanted the, so-called proprietary solutions. People were concerned about the history with those solutions, where you can get locked into a particular solution if you don't like the cameras after a period of time. You're kind of locked into those cameras because you couldn't find another solution that would support them, or maintenance costs would go up over time, or whatever the case may be. And now you kind of have this shift in the market again, back to the concept of single source solution, but it's almost a hybrid approach. I'm going to talk about that a little bit on the next slide. So you're having this shift back to vendors that provide all the components of the solution. People are starting to, I guess, remember the concepts that benefit this type of model, such as a single point of support, some level of assurance that all the system components will integrate properly and will maintain their integration over time, and so on and so forth. All the issues that we're going to talk about through the course of this presentation. You'll see, I got a couple of vendors here that are kind of hovering in the middle, right? You may consider them best of breed solutions. You may consider them an all-in-one single vendor solution, depending upon what level of product that you're specifying. If you're doing small jobs, you can get everything you want from either of these vendors to satisfy an entire video security solution, as an example. So you got these kind of hybrid vendors in there as well. So speaking of that, the hybrid vendor concept, hybrid single source open platform, you have these what I would classify as single source vendors, companies that make all the components of a solution, that make their components in such a way that they integrate with third-party solutions, right? They'll have a video management product, and a camera product, and an access control product, and analytics products, and so on and so forth. But the VMS product will integrate not just with that company's cameras, but other companies' cameras as well. So they're sort of open platform, but there's also benefits to getting the complete solution. Those might be feature benefits, right? Only certain features work if you get the end-to-end solution. The benefits could be on the business side. If you buy the access control and you buy the video, or more commonly perhaps you buy the video and the cameras, you get a certain discount on one component or the other. So there are incentives to take people towards the total solution. However, they can also provide the benefits of a single source vendor as well. All right, so I got 2 more poll questions. For those of you who specify single source solutions or prefer those types of solutions, why do you prefer those types of solutions? So if you can go back to the drc.participole.com, now you can use any option, A through F. And I took a stab at what some reasonable answers might be. So go ahead and try to answer that question there. We got 1 answer. I will up the answer bonus to $150. 2. Oh, there we go. I was going to up it again, but let me start the timer. There we are. Okay, I think we got all the answers that we're going to get. And it looks like it really hones in on 2 particular benefits. So why would we want to specify single source? By far the most popular is better integration, So, the idea that all the components will integrate at a deeper level, or the idea that all the components will maintain their integration over the future. And then single point of support was the other issue. So very interesting. Now I have the same question for best of breed. Why do you specify best of breed? So for those of you who specify best of breed systems, go ahead and take a stab at the answer. I'm going to start the timer. And this will help guide us in our discussion. Okay, thank you for participating. Let's take a look at the results. Okay, again, I kind of honed in on two particular options. The most popular option, C, products are the best for the customer applications, right? I think we would agree that the so-called best-of-breed products, you're going to ultimately have more choices than you would have from a single vendor. You know, one company's product line is not going to be as many offerings as many companies' product lines all put together. And then option D, more design flexibility. So actually, you know, very similar in concept to the products that are best for the customer applications. You have more design flexibility because you have more product options. So let's get into the meat and potatoes here. We're gonna break this down into 6 categories. We're gonna talk about the benefits and drawbacks of single source and best of breed with respect to system design and the freedom it gives you in design or the ease of design, features of the system, support for the consumer or for you as the consultant, pricing of the systems, benefits that you get pricing one system versus another. I think one of the biggest factors is long-term risk, and then training. All right, so the first topic here is system design. So I'll first present my observations, having worked in the security industry, primarily for what you consider best-of-breed vendors. That's been my background. But with respect to system design, a single source vendor could give you a path towards easier design of the system, right? So if you were trying to put together a system that involved video, access control, and other components, and you wanted to identify whether or not video would show up in a particular area of the access control interface, or you know, if somebody walked through a door, would it present the picture on file of that individual associated with the credential, along with the associated camera. You know, those are some pretty nuanced and detailed questions. You might decide to call up the video surveillance company and ask them that question. They might tell you, well, we didn't do the integration, you got to call the access control company. So you call the access control company and say, well, we're integrated with like, you know, 20 different video management systems, and we don't really work with that one all the time. So, you know, that can be a challenge with respect to designing a best-of-breed system. So with a single source system, you call one person, theoretically, they have all the answers because they work with it on a regular basis. And then, of course, the second bullet down, there's some assurance that all the pieces and parts will integrate, and that they will continue to integrate over the course of the installation, because they offer a single point of support on all the components of their system. That creates accountability. So obviously, if some component breaks, it won't be broken for too long, because they're going to get a whole bunch of phone calls and angry customers as a result. Now, having said all of that, there are some conditions, or these assumptions may not be true in all cases. And I'll give you an example. Some single source vendors have built their product portfolio by acquiring best-of-breed companies, right? So just because a single source vendor has products in each of these categories does not mean that they were all developed under one roof. So the interfaces and the workflows of the products may not match each other. You may not have consistent documentation. The integrations may be weak at first. You know, they probably will strengthen over time. You know, the person that is an expert on the video component of the system may not know the access control component of the system as well, and so on and so forth. So just because one brand represents many products doesn't necessarily mean that those products tie together in the way that we may assume that they do. And then with respect to best of breed, the argument can be made for design flexibility, and we saw from the polling questions that was obviously true for several people's experience in the audience here. You know, so because you have so many product choices, the design flexibility is there. So now what I'd like to do is turn it over to some of our panel members. And first thing I'd like to ask is, you know, maybe perhaps we can start with John. John, could you tell us a little bit about your practices and your security design practice? Do you tend to specify best of breed, single source solutions, and what is the impact on your system design experience?
Sure. So first, to reiterate what Jim said, it's very much, in our opinion, relying on the client's needs and the project's needs. So based on the project, what the project is looking to achieve, will usually depend on what type of technologies we're going to be implementing. Now, I think there's a disparity between single source and best of breed when you come to hardware versus software. So it's much easier to do best of breed, in our opinion, with hardware. It's the same type of relay logic and the same type of hardware integration. When you get to the software side, you're trying to do software integrations between access control, intrusion detection, intercoms, or video surveillance with those codes, and that's where you start to see a lot of that breaking going on during system updates and upgrades, and you're relying on multiple vendors to manage those iterations of software. You know, in our experience, we've seen a lot of integrations break from those software updates. So if you really don't understand those vendors and what their software channels look like and what their upgrade pathways look like, to make sure that there's QA involved in code checking and they're not deploying upgrades to their systems before those integrations are checked. And that can, like Brian had said, you know, it can change based on vendor to vendor, because one vendor may work with 20 or so integrations, and maybe they're, you know, slowly moving through that process to upgrade those systems. So to answer your question directly, Brian, it's a variety of solutions that we recommend depending on the client and project needs. But whenever we're looking at a majority of systems, especially on the hardware side, for like video surveillance, for example, we always want to test the cameras. We always want to create a test bed beforehand, especially if we're doing a best-of-breed solution.
Okay, that's an excellent point. Testing out the products, you know, before you make a recommendation. I think we all know, in particular with cameras, I would say more than anything else, what is listed on the spec sheet does not always match, you know, the reality, especially in terms of image quality. So that's an excellent point. Jim or Jeff, do you guys have anything you want to add?
The only thing I would add is that there are a number of folks in the room here with me who have suffered through the pains of trying to get through this process, where you're putting disparate things together and you're relying on the promises of the manufacturers who said, oh, absolutely, we have this seamless interface. The other issue you've got to be very careful of when you're looking at what you're thinking is a single source vendor, are they merely OEMing?
Oh, if I can make one point, if I can make one point to what you just said, that's an excellent, excellent point. A lot of single source vendors OEM components of their product line. You know, I'm involved with a vendor that OEMs and OEMs to others and OEMs products ourselves. So I mean, that's a very, very common practice in the industry. But you know, one other, I was speaking to a colleague of mine who had a significant amount of career experience at a company, household name that we'd all consider a single source vendor. And one of the points that he made is that, you know, within that organization, you had product management teams over these particular product lines that would almost compete with each other, and they would not necessarily have the same APIs in their products as they wanted to do it their own way. So you know, again, just because something is developed under one roof doesn't mean it's all developed by the same team, that they have the same philosophies, that there's not bizarre political infighting, or their, you know, organizations are different P&L centers. All of these things have ramifications. So it almost becomes a, you almost can't even categorize it in, you know, the sense of best of breed or single vendor. It's almost a case-by-case basis. But do you have anything to add, Jeff?
Well, the only thing I'd add is, you know, sometimes the decision about whether to go single source or best of breed really kind of comes down to your interactions with the client. And I'm sure as consultants, we've all sit in situations where we sit with a client or a new client and start talking about the security systems, and he's already got the whole thing designed. I don't know if you've had clients like that, or have. And oftentimes, you know, they'll get their thought or ideas about how to design their security by visits that vendors have made to the client's facility, and they'll sell them lock, stock, and barrel on a particular solution. Some of those are single source, you know, and so you have to almost backtrack at that point, talk about some of the pros and cons of each, and see if you can move forward. Other times the vendor will or the client will come out and say, you know what, we've standardized on this particular product across the county, and I know we're expanding our building, or we're building some new bricks and mortar elsewhere, but you know, we only want one particular type of software. We've got parts from this vendor already in stock, and you're just going to have to run with it.
Okay, perfect. Great observations. All right, the next topic category we're going to talk about are features of the products. So, you know, the observations that I've had with respect to best of breed products, I think most people would consider the best of breed products, you'll have a greater selection of products. Because the vendors are focused on one particular technology area, theoretically you'll see more innovation from a best of breed vendor. And I've highlighted some examples of that on the slide here. You know, enhanced H.264 technologies first came to market from vendors that we might consider a best of breed vendor. Lots of analytics were developed by companies that just focused on that originally, and so on and so forth. So you're going to see a lot of innovation with some of these best of breed vendors. therefore the feature sets might be more robust on the individual product level. However, going back to kind of the theme of some of the benefits of these single source vendors, is when you have several product categories all developed under one roof, when you put those together, the feature set of the integrated system, all from a single source vendor, might ultimately be better, right? So if you want a component from a single source vendor, it has a particular feature that you're interested in. If you try to mix another company's technology with that particular product, you might miss out on that feature set. And I can think of one example, I won't mention the company name, but if you use their system, they have a particular bandwidth-saving feature set that is available if you use the end-to-end solution, but if you try to mix in other cameras with it, you don't get that kind of benefit, right? So, but the integrated system has a fantastic, very rich feature set. So, but anyways, with respect to features, when you're designing systems, we'll start with Jim now. When you're designing systems, do you find clients have very, very specific feature requirements that kind of push you towards one company category or another? And what has your experience been with respect to what features are important, and where do you see those features align with best of breed or single source?
I think most of us are in the position of educating our clients. Rarely are we in a position where the client totally understands all the feature sets available to them. As a matter of fact, there's been many conversations through the course of these presentations about clients only using 15% of what the system feature sets and availabilities are. And so we have to make sure that we've done somewhat of what Jeff has said, and that's making sure we've done a real needs assessment so that the features match the needs, and that we educate the clients on how that really is going to work within their circumstance.
Okay, Jeff, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, there's just applications that you run into over the course of designing these projects where, as a consultant, you can see the problem that the client has presented to you. You've got an idea of a solution in your head about how to address that. Sometimes there's only one manufacturer that makes it, and that can be kind of a challenge. I don't know about you folks. We do a lot of our work in the public bid market. We're not allowed to sole source specify unless we absolutely have to. And so when you have that product, what to use. But they're the only ones that have it, or only one manufacturer out there. They're best of breed, like you're saying. You got to check those public bid laws, see if they'll allow you to do it, and really go back to that client and say, hey, how do you feel about this? If we just go with this particular vendor, they're the best, and if they really meet your needs for this, and see if you can get that sign off from them, and you can move forward in that manner.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're all, beating the same drum, and I'm going to bang it more. It's just, what does the client need? What are their requirements? Understanding that it's, that their needs, and then bringing them the products that, we recommend. We've got a book of probably 15 plus, 20 plus manufacturers, systems, different things that we can recommend. And that narrows down even further once we meet with the client, get their needs, understand what their site looks like, what is the operations center going to be doing, what do they want to do with the system, and that narrows that field down. And that part of that narrowing is single source, best of breed, combination, integrations, things like that. So,
all right, thank you. Okay, so it seems like the theme so far is really what's best for the client. Interview the client, see what technologies they're looking for, and let the features that they need kind of drive the vendor decisions or recommendations from there. So with respect to support, this seems a little cut and dry on the surface, but let me share with you some ideas that I had. With single source vendors, the idea of the support benefit is you avoid, what I call the blame game. And you can take a look at kind of a graphic up there. The idea is if you have several different vendors involved in one ultimate technology, right? So you got cameras, and you got a VMS system, and you've got hardware that VMS runs on, and you got switches that all that data flows over and so forth, and they're all produced by different vendors, and there's a problem with the system. Well, where does the problem exist? And so you get an upset customer, and the customer calls the camera vendor, and they troubleshoot the problem and say, well, it's not really related to us. We believe the problem is related to the VMS, so then you call a VMS vendor, and that's a separate company, and so on and so forth. The cycle repeats, and nobody wants to get stuck in this cycle. And I think that's a lot of the drive that we're starting to observe towards these single source vendors, right? One of the other observations that is common with these types of vendors is, although they provide a single point of support, it may actually just be a single 800 number to call. The agent that you get on the phone may be specialized in a particular technology area, and you find this is very common, especially with the larger companies or companies that acquired their technology portfolio through acquisitions. They may have support agents that are specialized on the access control, radio, hardware, and so on and so forth. So you talk to one individual, and that person has to troubleshoot to a certain point and pass you off to another individual. So you make one phone call, but you're not talking to one person. And then you ultimately have an experience similar to what some people may try to avoid with best of breed. And then arguments can be made for and against best of breed support experience as well. You could argue that support agents are focused on one particular technology area, therefore they're going to be perhaps more expert level. The possibility that you call and get somebody that knows the answer to your particular situation right away is theoretically higher in this case. However, with best of breed organizations, we'll go back to the comment that I made earlier in the presentation. You call up your VMS vendor, and it's integrated to your access control platform. You say there's a problem with the integration. Well, that's one of 20 access control integrations that we have, and I'm not really particularly familiar with that integration. Are you going to get somebody that's really expert level on the integrated system, right? However, the integrator involved in the project may act as that single point of support. So, is the support from the manufacturer particularly relevant? So those are all the discussion points and questions that we have. So why don't we start with Jeff? Jeff, what have your experiences been, or feedback from your customers on systems that you deployed that were single source versus best of breed, and how did the support experience work for those organizations?
I think when it comes down to support, it boils down to a couple things, really. Most important, of course, is the manufacturer and their ability to provide support. But also, what the type of support you're looking for. There's support that the client needs on the end of your project if he's trying to maintain this thing over its life cycle. That's one type of support. But there's also the support that the consultant needs, from the vendors during the design process. And I've worked with people over the course of my career in the security business, really kind of anti-vendor, I guess you could say. And people come into the office and you know this as a consultant. They're knocking on your door all the time. Hey, can we have a lunch and learn? Can I stop by and show you our latest product updates? And there's only so much time you can commit to that as a consultant. You got your own work first, And I've worked with consultants alongside me that say, no, just not meeting with them today. If I want to find something out, I'll find it on the internet, I'll read a white paper, I'll do whatever I need. And then there's other folks as well. And I guess I'll just speak from my personal experience. I think what manufacturers bring to the design team is an important element in a successful design. I think they're just as much a part of it. If you can get them involved in assisting with the design process, that's wonderful. They're a great source of information. They bring not only their knowledge base, but the latest in technologies to your project. So I consider it as one big design team. They never sit in front of the client, but they certainly answer all my questions so that when I'm in front of the client, I can be responsive to client needs.
Okay, thank you. John?
Yeah, I would add a third layer of support to Jeff's comments, which is the support that the manufacturer provides to their integrators, whether there's any type of certified integration program or type of training systems, and for the consultants to be able to understand that so that we specify the systems, we know the level of integrations and the level of certification that integrator needs to have in order to properly implement their systems, whether it's a combination of best of breed products or a single source product. For the majority of our clients that are smaller, they're looking for that integrator to provide that ongoing service and maintenance. Larger clients, you look at the Microsofts, the WeWorks, the guys who are actively involved and they understand those systems, they're going usually directly to those manufacturers and they're looking for them for support. So I agree with Jeff. There's multiple layers of support to the manufacturers that we're looking for, and especially right into our RFPs and specifications.
I think one of the things that we're losing here is that the decision whether you're going to go to a single source system or a best of breed depends largely on the integrator base that you've got to put bids out before. Because if you have an integrator base that is strong in that single manufacturer perspective or the best of breed perspective, that's how you're going to make your choice. If you've got a mix thereof, much to your point, Jim, you're going to put out a mixed spec that allows for single source or best of breed, because you're seeing that as an equal situation, because that's where your integrator strength is.
I'm just going to chime in one more thing real quick. One of the things we do build into all of our projects is an ability for, at the end of the project, the contractor that installed it to be able to dial in remotely to the system when of course, the client gives them access to it, to give that remote support. That's huge in corrections and detention. It has to be. A door goes down in the middle of the night, they can't dispatch somebody that quick. You got to have that those dial-in remote abilities to do diagnostics. The other thing in our specs is that, at least for the first year of operation, we're asking for that manufacturer and the contractor, well, the contractor mostly, to be on site every 3 months during the first year of operation to provide on-site support, not just remote support, but on-site as well.
Can I give a counterpoint?
Absolutely.
How many of you have been going through the cyber threat challenge? How many remote analytics have been exploited to get into the network and then into the system? So if you're going to use remote diagnostics, you better be darn sure that that doesn't add another vulnerability to your system.
So on that, I've got a number of government clients that we do that with, and that's typically managed with the IT department to allow a VPN, and so that any remote or any emergency service is done on schedule. So if they call at 2 a.m. and say, hey, we've got this issue, could you call IT first? I need a tunnel, because I can't get in until they open it. And so that door gets closed. It's, okay, you've got a tunnel for 2 hours, get it done.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Look this way.
All right. Great information. So, the takeaway points that I got out of that were, there's a lot you can do about support quality by building recommendations and requirements into the spec. And a lot of it depends upon how good are the integrators in the area, how well trained are they on the products that you're going to be recommending, and then what are the customer expectations, and what is the size of that customer. As a security product vendor, we have direct support relationships with our largest customers. We have remote access to some of our largest customers' networks. So yes, this is a blend, and it really depends upon the individual circumstances. So good information. Okay, I want to talk a little bit about pricing as well. There are, and I'd be curious to know how involved the consultant community is on pricing. I'm speaking from the perspective of a vendor, sitting, watching how customers try to get better prices on jobs, and how involved are you folks in those circumstances. So with single source vendors, an argument can be made that can you get a better deal from a single source vendor, and that deal may come in the form of a package. I've seen advertisements where a single source vendor advertises a VMS, and if you get their particular cameras, you get a 50% discount on the license cost of the VMS, and that's one of many examples, right? So there could be package buying opportunities. I'm sure in an individual sales opportunity, there's lots of negotiation done where, hey, we like your VMS, we're okay with your access control. Well, if you get them both, I'll give you a big discount on the package opportunity. So that type of stuff happens all the time, whether it's advertised to the masses or just specified to an individual consumer. Now, you may not always find that that's the case. Again, some of my colleagues have considerable experience at, single source organizations, especially larger ones, is that certain security technologies may come from a completely different business unit than another set of security technologies. So a consumer is buying several security technologies from one company, but within that company there are separate companies that have their separate P&L requirements. So trying to get a discount buying both pieces of the package together is going to be very difficult because of the internal politics and organization of that company. Now with best of breed solutions, the solutions are probably going to be priced pretty well because there's only one particular technology category, so it has to be competitive with everything else within that category. But that said, because the solution components can be swapped out, an individual consumer can bring in 3 or 5 or more systems. We've been in competitive situations where there's 13 VMS systems being evaluated. We're one out of those 13. Again, that was a relatively recent situation. So you can bring in multiple components that are competitive, and you just have to put pricing pressure on the vendor that you really like. You know, I want to bring in the 2 high-price vendors that I really like, and I'm also going to bring in, you know, the really, really low-price vendor to put pressure on the higher-price vendors to, you know, come down. That's a very common tactic. So, anyways, I'd be curious if I can open it up to the panel. How involved are you folks in the pricing and purchasing component, and have you seen these strategies? Have you employed them or recommended them to your customers? Who wants to start?
Yeah, I mean, for us, we're very involved in that. You know, we give a rough order of magnitude or an ROM, you know, at the very inception of the project when we're writing that basis of design, and we refine it as we go through to RFP, and then we give them a final ROM, and then, you know, hopefully that's within 5% of that final project cost. But the most important part about this is where does the 5-year total cost of ownership land? So when you look at SSAs, you know, are you getting a better deal? You might get a better deal in that year 1 cost with that, you know, discount for volume licensing with a single source vendor, but are they going to increase your SSA over the next 4 years where you're paying, you know, an incredible amount of money for that ongoing service agreement? The same argument can be had on the best of breed side, where now you're paying an SSA agreement to an integrator who's collecting all of those agreements from varying vendors and kind of, you know, analyzing them, asking the vendors for those 5-year TCOs, so you can understand, well, yeah, I might be getting a cheaper year 1 cost, but over my next 2, 3, 4, 5 years, where's my actual expenditures going?
Yeah, that's an excellent point.
I think that total cost of ownership is probably the best way to measure, are you really getting value? Because you could really be confused. It looks like you're spending $1 going in, but it costs you 10 coming out. You've really got to understand that total cost of ownership, and warranty plays a major factor in that. And then getting the integrator to understand that they have to pass on the extended warranty and include that in their pricing. Because often an integrator will give you a warranty for 1 year and not give you the extended portion of the warranty of the manufacturer.
We remind our clients of that on every project. It's so true, John. I mean, it's not the upfront cost of your bricks and mortar on these things. I know you got to be mindful of that. It's more to keep your project within budget when it goes out to bid, but you really have to look at what it's really going to take to run this place with staffing and maintaining your equipment and stock market.
So yeah, excellent point. I'll ask a follow-up. Oh,
well, and Brian, the one follow-up I would say to that is the real difficulty is in the different business units, right? So you may be working with a, you know, take one client that chat around work for together. You have different P&Ls for construction and then operations, and then, you know, and operations and management. So construction just wants to get it built. So all they're concerned about is that low year 1 cost. And operations is concerned about what they're on. Construction doesn't care about that, because once it's done and built, it goes to a different P&L. You know, so you have to understand who you're talking to and what your clients are interested in, and understanding their structure as well.
The other thing I'll also add to that too is that when we talk about different types of materials and components that go into our security designs, a lot of those discussions are had with our client's IT department. And they're the ones that are going to have to maintain this when all the work is done. And there might be certain products, you know, they might be certified in Cisco or trained on particular pieces of equipment, you know, that they can maintain. And yeah, it'd be great to go with the best price and go with an HP switch or something like that. But yeah, if they're certified in Cisco already, it's easier for them to maintain that over the life cycle. It might cost a little more upfront, but again, it saves over the cost of the life cycle of the facility.
The best projects that I've ever been involved in were where we had shootouts between the various manufacturers and then the various integrators. Because then we were able to have participation by all these different disparate entities within the client organization who could see what they're getting, understand how it's going to be priced, understand how it's going to be delivered, and understand really what they're getting from a usability perspective and a total cost of ownership perspective.
So as a follow-up question, in the kind of the grand scheme of the project total cost of ownership, how influential is a vendor's pricing and maintenance policies and total cost of ownership for a system? Is it significant? Can the vendors do a lot to to reduce that, or is it relatively insignificant?
I'm going to take a whack at that one. Because that bothers me more than anything, especially when it comes to VMS software. I don't know if you guys are finding this out too. Licensing costs for that stuff, when they add a camera or upgrade your software or things like that. There's some great VMS platforms out there that can handle a whole boatload of cameras. But boy, if they're going to hit it to the owner after the fact for adding a camera here or there or whatever, and upgrading his software, it really has to be considered holistically.
Interesting. Okay, anything else, Ned?
No, I didn't read it.
No, that's it. All right. Yeah, no, very interesting. Okay.
Just one thing to add to that is I've had in some of these projects too to keep in mind, especially on those software agreements, is when you're going into an enterprise client that may already have an agreement with a major Genentech or Milestone or whatever that they're paying these licensing, and you're adding in to an existing enterprise client, it's very important to keep that integrator on track that you're adding license, you're not buying new. Because I've had, we've come in on projects that the original license was voided out by a manufacturer. Oh, well, you bought new now, so now we're under this whole other portion of licensing, and it's more expensive than adding into the base license.
And likewise, Jared, when a client is, probably building a new bricks and mortar on the other end of this county or whatever, not to repurchase that base license, he's on a county network, we're using the base that he's got, and then just put an additional cameras.
So I don't need the mic, I'll talk loud enough. Just a couple of comments. First of all, I can't imagine any of us in this room not wanting to specify the best of whatever we can for our client. The old days of the holistic solution from a Panasonic back in the 850 days when it was an 850 switch, their cameras, their DVRs, was wonderful because you had a wonderful working package that you knew. The industry's grown up since then. Things are changed. We have independent manufacturing, cameras, software, storage. It's all changed. Today, looking at the best of breed still needs to be looked at. I mean, you wouldn't buy a wonderful car with the worst tires. I would hope not. So you have to look at the entire package. Total cost of ownership is a piece, but it really comes down to the guy sitting over here. Oh, Jim, it's you. I'm going to pick on you. Because here's what happens. I'll speak for me, but I'm guessing...
That's the only integrator in the room.
Yeah, I didn't have a choice. I'm guessing most of us feel the same way. We'll look at the client's needs, and that's where it starts, right? What does the client need? We certainly don't want to sell them something they don't need or aren't going to use. So we look at what they need. We decide that. Do we always get to decide exactly whose product? Not always. Sometimes we have to go to a client that says XYZ product or approved equal, right? So then who does it come down to? It comes down to the bidder. Because our spec says Panasonic camera picking up Panasonic or approved equal. Jim gets it and comes back with an RFI during the bid process and says, AIM will put that camera in the lab and that thing is like so far out of spec, don't even think about it. Okay, what do you recommend, Jim? We're going to come back with this, and this is why. At the end of the day, we as specifiers can specify anything we want. We can follow every letter of the law. If this guy doesn't have the talent on his staff to get it installed, warn us of roadblocks that they've run into in the past. An example is we had a major video platform, VMS. We have wonderful cameras. We have a major access control vendor and an enterprise system, right? Major VMS, major access control, camera in the middle. The vendor who installed it, and by the way, this was a low bid situation. We recommended this vendor not be chosen. I won't share who it is, obviously. So the vendor did not know that the cameras were tripping motion constantly to the VMS. The VMS's API was flooding the access control servers, which were crashing on a nightly basis. And you know what we got? It finally took the access control manufacturer, quite frankly, after me calling them and saying, our office has now suspended any more support or specification of your product until this is fixed. That's how bad it got. And it turned out, ultimately, the API was fine on both sides. The enterprise class server was right. The video management system, there's really nothing wrong with it.
And the access control was just taking data.
But the vendor had no clue what they did.
The integrator.
The integrator had no clue what they did.
But to that point, Phil, and I think they said earlier, I mean, and I know you guys do this, we do it too. John's company, everybody in here. We're not specifying product, you're right. We might not get to choose at the end of the day for the sole reason that we're not going to recommend to our client anything that can't be supported by a host of integrators, and let's call it 2 or 3 minimum.
That's correct.
Within a 40-mile radius of their facility, right?
Yeah.
And that has the training, the support, and the experience to do those and can provide evidence of that.
I guess what I'm getting at the end of the day, we're dependent on this guy.
Well, but I'm going to go back to what you said. You're right. We wouldn't recommend anything but best in class. And today, best in class can be single source, right?
Sure.
What we're leaving out of this conversation too, I think, is the sustainability factor, right? So there's an infrastructure sustainability that we can implement now that eases the problems for all of our clients if, and I'm not picking on you, Jim, if the integrator fails.
You walked in here.
Or that interface breaks.
Right.
So we need a way out in today's world in particular, because we can't guarantee that the best in class is going to work together anymore.
That's right.
We've got major projects where, and major manufacturers who weren't talking together after they had already deployed millions of dollars in systems. But we're not going to play nice in the sandbox.
No, so part of our job is to really ping the manufacturers, host shootouts, as Jim said, and really say, how does this work and what have you done to ensure it's going to continue to work? And by the way, our vendors,
and what is the legal agreement?
And are the vendors, are the integrators that are listed as part of you as a VAR or an approved vendor capable of doing this? And we need to vet that.
Absolutely. That's that certification piece, the training piece, making sure that it's all written into that RFP, making sure you have preventive maintenance schedules and all of that's written up. Also just making sure that you can, especially on highly complex projects that we're all involved in, running test beds, doing a test lab, making sure it works, seeing it actually happen, run it for 30 days before you accept it, proving that, doing a POC proof of concept.
Agreed.
Chris made a good point there from a vendor side, from a manufacturer side, just to speak for a minute. Whereas one day we may integrate very well with company XYZ, and then next year they buy a direct competitor of us. Now they become, instead of a friend, a frenemy. And so that creates a very distinct channel conflict, and so it changes the dynamic of how that integration gets supported in the future. We become more stringent on the guidelines and how we play with each other, whereas before we may have been a lot looser. And that's for obvious reasons, and that's going to happen. We can't control what other manufacturers do in the marketplace.
I also think it's upon us to make sure we're clear on our specifications, so that when a vendor or manufacturer looks at it, there isn't a wide gap. Oh, we're going to know everything all the time, of course. But we should really tighten up our specifications and make sure they're tight enough so when we get to that narrow point, we're not all over the map. A couple of degrees this way, a couple of degrees this way. That's about it.
All right, we got a couple of questions over here. We'll start with you.
I had a question. I'd like some input, I guess. I'll go back to the title of your presentation, which was Integration of Disparate Systems. And I'll go, your first slide, the design slide, I looked at it fairly literally. It had intrusion, fire, access control, VMS, analytics, you name it on that list. I don't believe there's any single source manufacturer out there. I could be just not very intelligent on the market. I've been around for a little while, but I don't believe there's any single source vendor that does all that. But I think the end users probably would like.
Yeah, there's a few.
You got a few, okay. Yeah. So I think the end users would like to think that they could have a system that can integrate that well. End users want that feature for efficiencies. But because of all the issues with integration and them working or not working, are the systems going to stay disparate, and are they better off staying disparate? So you can actually advocate best of breed and put best solutions in for access, or video, or for intrusion. That's a good, where is that going to go? Is that the best way?
Yeah. Well, to beat that drum again, right, it depends on the client and the needs of the project. So the biggest, and you guys can, I hope you guys can agree with me, the biggest unifications that we see is access and video, followed by intercom potentially, right? And that's usually, and sometimes intrusions in there as well, as though there's really not, that's mostly an integration with most vendors. But does that client then want to also add in public address, mass notification, firewall, and all that? At that point, yeah, now you're moving over to best of breed. You know?
Well, it gets to the point where as you add in more of those applications, it's going to get to the point where those applications can't be done together. Or those applications to a point can't be integrated because those applications all aren't going to be able to talk to each other. That's
sure, and what's the definition of integration? Is it a central monitoring and operations center where all I'm doing is taking inputs and making reports out of that? Or is it the fire alarm system and the video surveillance system and access control system all working?
Integration should be them being able to communicate with each other, right?
But there's many forms and different types. I think there's many definitions of what integration is.
Right.
Well, that's the difference. There's a difference between interoperability and integration.
Okay.
Integration can be as simplistic as a hardwired connection and a relay. That's integration. Interoperability is the single piece of glass, the advanced messaging.
What I said, unification is what I said. Yeah.
Right.
Oh, no, yeah. Don't get us.
Yeah, I think there's one part of the equation where we haven't touched on, and we talked about ownership. Somebody has to on the end user side, take ownership of the system. And you have to, I'm working with a client and they want to do X, Y, Z, W, you name it, they want to do it all. But I'm asking, we can design it, we can do it, but who's going to take responsibility? Who's going to manage the system?
Well, now
and then you can take the vendor, you can take the manufacturer, it's going to go to crap if somebody doesn't take ownership, you know, within the
now you're in the user conundrum.
It also depends on what we're, you know, one of the first conversations we have is what's the point of demarcation, right? So and with today with the IT and the convergence of networks and all those key terms, right? What's the point of demarcation? Is it the patch panel? Who's punching down? Who's plugging in? Is it the servers where IT is providing service and storage, and then the integrator is doing software? You know, you have to define that point of demarcation so that we know who's responsible for what components and what systems.
But that's even with the owner, someone on the owner side has to take responsibility to make sure that happens and to make sure that comes together, because, you know, everybody's going to be doing this.
That is absolutely the elephant in the room. And because I was going to say it a different way, but it's the same subject. Working backwards from the thing that you need all the king sources and all the king's men to extract out of the end user, especially when the end user is a consortium of departments, is what are the con-ops? How do you design a system without knowing who's going to operate, how they're going to, how are you going to staff this thing, right? And the worst thing that four-letter word PSIM did is it created an illusion that they could kick the can down the road and make all those decisions later on, you know, because you're going to deploy this software that basically can integrate together everything they've ever bought and anything that they might buy in the future was that wording exactly was in a spec that I got once. You know, anything we might buy in the future. And as an integrator that has sent RFIs in on PSIMs trying to get, forget about just naming convention, rules. How do you want to do this? How do you want to do that? I don't know, you tell us. It's your operation. I don't know intimately your operations.
If you'd like us to do that.
I thought pound turnstiles were the most expensive thing an integrator could ever install because of what? No, it is right here, is when you get into the PSIM and when you get into the level of integration, it is such a subjective Grand Canyon, you know, and the only way that you can hang a price on it is knowing the legacy history of the consultants, the manufacturers, and what have you. Otherwise, if you go into something like that on a 7 or 8 figure project with people that you haven't worked with before, I hope you have a terminal illness, because, you know, you're going to be better off.
Or this will give you one.
We've talked a couple of times throughout the course of the days we've been here about putting this all in the hands of a $12 an hour farm.
Yeah, exactly.
So if we haven't done the interface with the client so that they understand what Fred's talking about. What are you getting into when you're buying this integrated system in terms of getting a system administrator, getting a higher quality of person in your command center? Then the whole system will fail. Now, the other problem that we as specifiers run into is that sometimes we are subcontractors to like the architect, who hasn't given us that direct connect to the end user. How have you guys successfully achieved getting an integrated system that's understood and accepted by the client when you're in that position where you don't have that necessarily direct client interface?
Phil, you want to answer that question for World Trade Center or business?
What would you like to do? We don't have enough time.
I have a dog in that fight.
Yeah, we all
How do you get paid by now?
General, it's Division
First
20,
place.
right? Division 28 doesn't cover ConOps and SOPs. Right.
That's the problem.
First and foremost. That's it. That's the problem.
Right? So you're not writing a spec that includes, so, and I only tease Phil about that because they tried their best to put in, you're gonna program 398 or 400 programming features, rule sets within this piece.
26,000 points.
Yeah, 26,000, estimated. It wound up being a lot more than that. But, you know, it's impossible. It's impossible. And until there's somebody who's ready, you know, and we're doing large GSOCs and VSOCs, and, you know, getting people to understand development of SOPs and the entire process and how it comes together, to your point, Fred, is the hardest thing. You're not going to choose systems based on their ability to do that, because they can't. You are going to choose integrators who support those systems, and we keep talking around the issue, and John, you brought it up, it resides on the servers. Integrators have to have IT specialists now. It's a whole new world. But there's so many other fingers in the pie when you do that, right? I'm being hosted on a VM that's controlled by my IT on a network that's inaccessible, and I can't get the port open, and I need the panel on, and then I'm going to integrate. And, you know, change management is going to be part of your specification.
You know, to Chris's point, we recently, the last 2 years, finished a 3,000 square foot GSOC for a major insurance company. We knew exactly what they wanted. Had great concepts, had great staff, well-trained staff. Who came to us, we sat down together, they said, this is what we're doing, this is what we wanted to do, and we built them a wonderful center and went off without a pitch. We had another major insurance company come to us and say, we want to build a GSOC.
Just like theirs.
And we said, what do you want to do with it? They said, we have no idea. And we said, well, what do you expect it to do? Well, someday we're going to connect all our 131 buildings across the U.S. This is true. You may know this is. We turned the job down. To Jim's point earlier. These guys didn't have a clue. Oh, by the way, this has to be...
I didn't take the job either. I didn't do it.
This has to be done in 7 months. But what do you want? I don't really know what I want, but I want a piece of it. This is a fortune.
I have the better client who has 600 plus facilities globally who said, first find me a sustainable platform, and then we'll work our way into that.
There you go. That makes
sense. Love it.
That's an informed opinion.
Yeah, why don't we take the next point? Yeah, great conversation. And to kind of segue into this topic here, training is interesting. We talked about how integrators, you guys are at the mercy of integrators, and that's a very, very difficult condition to be in when you're trying to specify a system that meets the desires of the consumer. So with single source systems, I can tell you one of the biggest selling points that they make to integrators oftentimes is that you get trained once, you maintain one certification across all these different types of systems. It's a lot less expensive. You don't have to pull your resources out of the field. Again, this is the integrator. In order to get trained on the access control system, the video system, the cameras, and so on and so forth. So that's appealing to integrators. With best of breed systems, again, with respect to the integrators, there may be a little more flexibility, let's say, with respect to training requirements, depending upon the vendor. Although more different types of certifications across more different vendors need to be maintained, it can be more expensive. There are some best of breed vendors that have very expensive training. There are some that are very flexible and have inexpensive training. And when you kind of add up all the different products an integrator wants to represent, they can be expensive, it can be time consuming, you got to pull resources out of the field. So it's a consideration because the integrator community is so important to the mission of the folks in this room. You know, how does training requirements of different types of manufacturers affect your ability to specify successful systems?
Well, from the integrator side, I mean, what I see is there's training published on manufacturer websites for the single source products. And as far as best of breed, it's specific to that product. Very rarely do you see that, you know, XYZ integrator is qualified or certified in the, no offense, AMAG and Salient integration, right? They're certified in AMAG, they're certified in Salient. I don't think it's enough to assume that they're certified in integrating those two platforms. Now, the AMAG Salient integration is a deep integration on the AMAG side, so I think it's part of, it behooves us to ask that question and have that as a pre-qualifier if that's the type of system that we're going to be putting in. Just to flip for a second on the other side of training with the end user, right? Overall, and I don't know if you guys would agree with me, I think that the training aspects from the manufacturers and from the vendors needs to completely be revamped for those end users. It's not enough for that $12 an hour guard to sit through a 1-hour webinar that, you know, teaches them that system, and then now all of a sudden they're supposed to operate the system proficiently, whether it's best of breed or unified single source. A best of breed solution that, you know, there's the potential that they may be interfacing with 2 or 3 softwares at the same time. I've been in operation centers. We've responded to a few incidents at different client sites. And for example, when there was that shooting on 31st Street outside the Empire State, we were inside that command center, and the guys had no idea how to pull up cameras. And you've got NYPD and everybody and their mother come into that room, and they have absolutely no idea what they're doing. So there has to be additional training, regularly training programs, whether it's disparate best of breed systems or single source. And I may be getting trailed off your question a little bit, but additionally, you know, whether it's the manufacturer or the vendor offering those advanced SOC trainings.
But it's not adequate to just, whether it's a single source or best of breed, it's not adequate whether the integrator is choosing to do it or the contractor that takes a contract who's subcontracting out the manufacturer, the parachute is a manufacturer to give the saturation
It's not,
you know, 3 days worth of training because that's what the contract calls for. And how much of that is retained? You know, so it's frequency, not amplitude. Right.
We're specifying factory training. Yeah. First and foremost, this goes back to the integrators. Again, I'm not picking on you and I'm not saying it's Kratos, but the integrators have become so diversified in their product representation in the past 10 years. You remember a time when you represented 2 products, and now you represent 20 because of all of these issues.
Yeah.
There is no one in your organization that can provide factory level training, even at an operator level these days, that even has the time to do that, even if they bid on it.
I didn't mean to say that this excludes the manufacturer training. Complementing the manufacturer training.
Absolutely.
It has to be the integrator, because he's the one who's going to be with them long term. And if you do parachute in the factory training and they have turnover on there's got to be sustainability through the opera. So I believe it's a hybrid of the.
That's why we use that for videotaping and all of that, right?
It is also a hybrid of many other things. It goes back to the comments on ComOps. If I'm only taught how to push the buttons and flip the switches, I may not understand what I'm doing with it and what I'm achieving with it. And so it's not just a matter of the technological training of what the system can do or not do, but it's what it's intended to do that is probably the most important factor that's often lost in training. The other major issue with the certification training is, yes, I went through certification 10 years ago. Here's my certificate. Where is the refresher training in these certifications to make sure that that technician is today current?
Or our technicians didn't leave that were trained.
Yeah, I got a better one. How about the national organization who has the partnership and is certified, but it's not every office has gone to it, right?
Or and the reality
One
is
office is certified.
Exactly.
Right, and these all the way across the country.
the difficulty too, and for those of us that are ASIS members, something that I've been struggling with is that we're engineers, consultants, retired law enforcement, military. We all come from different aspects of of life, we're not educators, or at least I'm not an educator, you know, and the sales engineers that come and do those presentations to us, or the, you know, project managers that are pulling cable and they're supervising those guys, they're not educators. So when they sit down and do a presentation on a software and are trying to teach those officers or supervisors how to use it, they're not really understanding exactly how to flow through that and really transpire that education to an adult learner. Mike, did you have a question?
I think there's a responsibility as a specified consultant sometimes to take your head away from the technical details. I have a 4-year-old daughter. I had an Amazon TV for 5 minutes and she was already watching Frozen. She looked at it, she clicked through the buttons. When I hear operators can't operate security systems, I sometimes look at them and I look at the system, and you have to right-click through 35 menus to get to the right thing to pull up the digitally integrated video with pre- and post-alarm, and this. We also need to go to the shows, we need to look at the integration, we need to pick products that are working for the $12 an hour guard, not give them a spaceship and then get mad because they have a $12 guard from the spaceship.
Well, I think that also relies on deployment, right? How do we specify deployments? I can't tell you, and I know you guys will probably hopefully agree with me, where you specify Active Directory integration. And you say every officer needs to have their login and their password, and they should only have access to these functions, and that's it, right? Supervisors have access to these functions. Then you show up, and you do your punch list, and it's admin, right? And everybody's got access to everything, and the guards have no idea what's going on, right? So making sure and understand, and you know, you ask them, you say, well, why is it admin? Oh, well, you know, Jerry forgot his ID, he doesn't know his password, it was too difficult to integrate, we kept forgetting, so we just left it as admin. Right, then they call me up 3 months later and say, hey, our video showed up on YouTube and we're trying to figure out who exported it. Admin did. It's like, well, yeah, I mean, there's a reason why we specified a certain way, right? So how do we go back and check that and perform our commissioning, if you will, right, to use that term, so that we can ensure that those provisions are in place and the right people that are being taught in those systems are being taught the right functions and they're not being overloaded.
Now, as a manufacturer, Brian.
Yeah, Brian.
Yeah, Brian. One of the problems with this, what we just talked about, when you want to change operators, sometimes the system goes blind for that period of operator change. So what are you guys doing to make sure that there's a smooth movement from operator to operator without having that gap in coverage because the system wants to restart when the new operator logs in?
Just log in as admin.
That's it. Just log in as admin and don't worry about it.
No,
the answer is buy more client licenses.
Yeah, with our system, we've removed logins completely to avoid that particular issue. I'm kidding. No, the system continues to operate. It's a good question. So by coverage, I assume you mean the live display of the system goes away when somebody logs in, logs out. That's probably a pretty common problem with most systems, the ones that I'm aware of at least. Same with ours. If you change operators in our system, you have to log out of it, so the display will go away, and then you log in. And the reason the display goes away is because oftentimes the user experience changes dramatically between logins depending upon the user permissions, or at least it could in theory. So the system, takes itself down and then brings itself back up. In the background, all the recording is still taking place. All the automated actions on the back end are still occurring. The live display stops and then starts again during the login, logout process. That's a good observation.
That is such a huge problem, and it isn't just your platform. But the real life situation out there is you have operators that are at a desk. There's an emergency, he's called away. Somebody jumps in and for him, and without like an instantaneous or even biometric handoff, and then there's a traceability of who did what, who authorized this, who made this control. Until that is paced, that's a real life example that we've had on multiple occasions, and we even had a program where it had individual logins and end user because of the problem, the real life problem that they had of this. They intentionally went back to a single, admin, login because it's not working for the real life, challenges they have in operations. It's not that they intentionally wanted to get lazy and they had to accommodate that kind of fluidness, within operations.
That's interesting. We're gonna go into the last point here because we're almost out of time in the session, so just bear with me while we move through. I think one of the most important, one of the most interesting elements or observations about best of breed versus single source is the risk factor, because there's risks in both types of vendors. What are some of the risks? Well, my observations are with best of breed vendors, one of the biggest risks that I'm sure a lot of folks in this room are concerned about is, will the integration between systems break when that new version comes out? Are there any processes in place to certify when new versions come out? How do I know that this particular version works with that version? So that's one risk. Another risk with the best of breed is typically these companies are smaller organizations or new organizations.
1 second.
Yeah, go right ahead.
He talked about setting up a test bed before you put the system in. How many of you have successfully had your clients establish an offline test system so that when version changes came in, they tested them offline before putting them in production? That's something, if they've got, that we should be recommending to all of our clients, because that offline capability avoids finding out, oops, my system just totally crapped out because of the version conflict.
Yeah, it's relatively common from my perspective for our larger organizations. They will have a sandbox area, that kind of an offline version of the smaller version of their system where they can test patches, new updates, things of that nature. Another risk for best of breed companies, because they're smaller, they could be acquired, right? And then what happens, and then financial stability.
P9000.
Those risks with larger companies too. Very example, right?
Thanks for that, Chris.
So with a single source vendor, are you going to, if you buy all the components from this vendor and you're kind of locked in, are you going to encounter high maintenance costs down the road that you're stuck with, right? Will the solution components not keep pace with the market, right? In 3 years, will the video management component that you got from the single source vendor that integrates with all the other components, is it going to have all the features and functions that its peers in the marketplace have? Or are you going to be behind the times? One of the biggest ones, if you don't like a particular component of the system, if there's those high maintenance costs, it's going to be very difficult to replace part of the system with something else that you like better. You might be stuck if you need the integrated capabilities. And then of course, support could fluctuate quality over time. Again, if you're locked in, these are all kinds of problems that occur when you're locked into a particular vendor. So now I want to pass over the panel and ask what's your experience and observations over time with customers that have chosen best of breed and either had great experience and poor experience, and the same with a single source vendor.
Well, I think we're at an interesting time because we're starting to see more of, especially on the hardware side, where we have a unified open platform. So vendors that may be single source but are utilizing, for say, Mercury panels, right? That may not lock us into that vendor themselves, and we may be able to switch over to a different single source by updating that firmware, or reinstalling a VM machine or something like that. I've been in situations where we've taken one vendor that uses Mercury hardware and switched it over to another, and there's database issues and things like that. But I found it even more difficult when you have a proprietary hardware system, and not to throw anybody under the bus, I don't think they're here today, it's Castle Systems, and switching that over to a non-proprietary platform. That's a real hassle, because you're trying to build two wall fields next to each other, and just the coordination of that can really be a pain.
When it comes down to these new versions and such, software upgrades, those are overrated, but it just comes down to, that old adage. Is it, the latest and greatest cutting edge, or is it, bleeding edge kind of stuff, and we really need to try the true stuff in our facilities. I love speccing new technology when I can, but when it comes to a new version of something, whether it's single source or best of breed, boy, I want to know that stuff's working before it goes into our facility or you egg all over your face, So I'm following up on this stuff, and I want to make sure it's been deployed somewhere else before it's deployed in my project.
I think a number of us in this room have said we provide custom solutions with off-the-shelf equipment, because we don't want to be that test bed unless we know we're going to be that test bed. If we're going to be identified as a beta site, we know it going in.
Right.
We don't want to be the beta site by surprise. Right.
The client agrees, and you know what you're in for.
But that's what my point earlier to John's is the sustainability of the backbone, right? The infrastructure. And it is the agnostic panels, but there is a place for the proprietary and a way to do that. So you have to be very strategic with your client when you're making those selections and what you think could be the issues. If I only have 2 integrators in the region and one of them's so-so and the other one's really good, that relationship could last forever, but that relationship could be dead in a year. So we're planning fault tolerance or sustainability into the infrastructure and making sure that they can integrate across multiple platforms, whether it's software, hardware, firmware. Now we're going to start seeing with OSDP, we're going to see readers that can be flashed right along with panels and everything else. So, there's a way to do that, and we all really need to start thinking about it. As much as the proprietary guys would like to say we own the world and our stuff works better because it is proprietary software to proprietary panel. There are feature sets. I'm saying that there's a place for that, and there is definitely some functionality we can't get on the common platforms. But we have to be more strategic as specifiers and engineers in how we meet our clients' needs, because to your point, I'd love to install the next new greatest thing, and every time there's a regime change now in these companies, and it's more and more frequent. There's no longer is the security director there for 20 years. They're not there for 10, 15 years. They're there for 5, and they're out the door, and then there's somebody else. And so we're trying to create the relationship with the company and say, oh yeah, we've got an easy fix for that. So there's a way to do it, and I think you can use both, quite frankly.
Yep. The integrator is kind of that focal point, but the integrator may be that rotating thing you're talking about.
That too.
And so one of the things to absolutely avoid is having the integrator develop the integration. Because if you let them do the APIs and all the things to make these nice systems talk together, then who owns it? Right.
As an integrator, I want to agree with that. Because, and we've done it, but only after we absolutely validated there was no other way to do this off the shelf, and it was an absolute essential functional requirement, and everybody knew we were doing a one-off, and then hopefully the industry would grow into it, and we migrated into a standard platform.
I don't think a lot of integrators want to go there.
Just
Because when it breaks, the risk is when it breaks, they're on the hook for it, and that's the first argument in the divorce, right? And sooner or later they're out the door, and now it doesn't function at all, and the whole thing's going away. And even the manufacturer doesn't understand how to fix it. So it's the last thing they want to do.
They've gotten bids where they said they were going to do that.
Yeah, you got to turn them down and say no. You just have to.
Well, just from a manufacturer standpoint, listening to you guys, we understand your aggravation and agitator over all of this. But one of the things that can help us, obviously, is because we have to pick up the pieces a lot of times because everybody just throws it back out there, and the owner says our name on the product in the closet, is maybe that going forward on these larger opportunities that it's locked into the bid that you require the manufacturer to be on site for a certain amount of days to certify. We go out there and all of a sudden we get this phone call, and I get the 5-alarm fire Friday afternoon. We're ripping the shit out. It's not been working for a year, and I'm like, what's going on? And we fly somebody in, and all of a sudden they open up the box and they start looking at everything, and everything's configured incorrectly. Bit rates are never set to what the requirements were. Cameras, different cameras. We have systems that they say are blowing up, and find out it was 80 cameras, but now it's 130 on one server. So all of a sudden nobody's ever checked it, and it's our situation because nobody ever went in and said, okay, sign off.
But that's on your integrators.
It is.
It really is. If an integrator attached 130 cameras to a system that was originally designed to support 80 with 15% growth, then shame on them.
Well, Chris, I would say that it's on us.
I'm sorry? Was there a FAT test? Was there a factory acceptance test as part of the spec?
Yeah, but hold on.
It grew.
I'm talking about how it grew over time. I'm not talking about how, if we're still part of the project, that isn't gonna happen.
Right.
But I think I bring in another array, right?
I think we all agree, though, that if we know, and the client knows exactly what product or systems they're going with, it's very important to bring that manufacturer in early on so that they can guide us through that, you know, because they understand, and Brian, you're the engineer for Salient, so you understand nuances of the system that maybe we don't get from our sales business development guys, right? So if we know we're designing the Salient system, you know, we're going to engage you very early on in the design so that we make sure every, you know, T is crossed and I is dotted, and then, right, there's nothing we really can do after the factory acceptance testing, you know, because there's parameters in our specs for growth rates and what we're designing to. But that's about client management and relationships with the integrators.
But to his point too, that sub or that agreement, that SSA, better damn well include PES services for whatever duration they're signed up for. So when you say they're required, I've got to put it in a spec. Well, it should already be in the product offering that you've got professional engineering services to go in and validate that.
Every party needs Uber. We're out of time. We can certainly say as long as we want to. This has been a very engaged conversation. So if we want to continue, but there may be some who are more interested in hitting the happy hour.
What better place to carry this argument on?
Let's give one more comment. So both Chris's, I mean, I think, and I'm not going to speak for Chris Miter, but I think you were thinking of when that end user calls the manufacturer, because all manufacturers have that final, you know, the end user's calling because we're ripping yourself out. I think what we're all saying here in this room is that as long as we're all communicating, right, because there are scenarios for whatever reason that, you know, Jim's in the room, so we've got a big little Jim, right, so Jim will call us, right, or so finally that end user calls the manufacturer, and as long as we're all communicating, we're going to make it right. This manufacturers, like Chris says, I mean, it's 5 o'clock on a Friday, we got something on the damn boat, plane, airport, whatever it is to get there.
No, and what Chris is talking about more times than not is they won't buy the SSA from Jim anymore. They're sick of paying for it. It's, you know, but that's the way this whole industry is headed. Right. It's all service fees.
It's a different conversation.
Right, and then they're not renewing. They don't have an updated version. That's where the failure is. It's not on the overload. It's the fact that they didn't buy the latest version. And, you know, the bugs that were in there have grown into enormous birds. You know, it's those are challenges we're all going to face, and you're always going to get that Friday call that says I'm ripping the shit out.
And it's so much. We have all in this room, all the sides of the fence represented here, have been burned by false promises. Tell us the freaking truth. If it's not going to be ready for 6 months, even though you told us it was going to be ready yesterday, update us. Don't let us get it installed and find out it ain't going to be ready for 6 months.
Well, that's for like you said, communication is key. That's the same with my marriage. It's the same.
The bright side, though, is I think buyers that are coming out now, coming more from the IT side. The IT side are used to these problems more than the physical security side. So they anticipate these problems differently. They understand the value of investing in software and support over time. So a lot of these things in 5 years will, I think, will greatly diminish, except for legacy.
Yeah, and if you want to talk about communications, especially with IT, Jared was here, and I'm sorry he left, but Jared and I both worked with the same client. And the reason we worked with the same client is because we were hired by the director of security, and Jared was hired by the director of IT. And basically they both said, here's my security consultant. And now we're leveraging those relationships to try to build a successful product for the client. But it's challenging because there's different needs from both sides.
And you're right, IT knows how to communicate, because every time you schedule a call with one of them, there's 20 people on the line.